That's it, Mom. Get out. Those were the first words that sliced through the warm, stuffy dining room, sharp enough to silence the clinking dishes and humming heater. They didn't sound like my son. They sounded like a stranger wearing his voice. If you've ever been dismissed, disrespected, or pushed aside by the people you loved most, this story will touch a deep place in your heart. Stay with me, you need to hear what happened next. I sat there for a moment, not moving, my fingers still curled around the warm ceramic of my coffee mug. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. 7:42 p.m. Too early for this kind of cruelty, too late to pretend I hadn't heard it. The overhead light buzzed faintly, flickering in a way it never had before, as if even the bulbs could sense something ugly boiling under the surface. My son stood at the end of the table, chest rising and falling too fast, his face red in patches the way it got when he lost his temper. His wife sat beside him, lips pressed together like she'd already rehearsed this moment. The smug look on her face wasn't loud, but it carried its own kind of violence. I didn't answer him. Not yet. I lifted the mug to my lips, took a slow sip of coffee that had already gone lukewarm, and felt the heat settle somewhere low and firm inside my chest. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't begging. I wasn't even hurt, not in that second. I was steady. And maybe that scared them more than if I'd thrown the mug across the room. I placed the mug down with a soft tap and finally looked up. "You're telling me to leave?" I asked quietly. Not pleading. Not broken. Just asking. He opened his mouth to say something louder, nastier, but before he could speak, my daughter-in-law leaned closer to him, touching his arm like she was reminding him of his script. Her voice came out sugary and icy at the same time. "It's time she gives us space," she said. As if I were clutter. As if I hadn't spent the whole day cooking the very meal cooling on the table between us. I looked at the food, roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, cornbread, gravy bubbling in the pot I'd been stirring when they walked in whispering behind me, and felt a slow ache spread in my ribs. Not heartbreak. Not yet. Something older. Something deeper. Something tired. Outside the window, the December sky was already black. A thin line of frost clung to the edges of the glass, glowing under the porch light. My old knitted sweater sleeves brushed against my wrists as I adjusted in my seat, realizing how cold the room suddenly felt despite the heater humming. My son's eyes darted toward the far side of the table, to the envelope half hidden beside his plate. Beige. Important. He hadn't meant for me to see it. That detail slipped into my mind like a puzzle piece falling into place, even though I didn't yet know the rest of the picture. Not fully. Why now? I asked, keeping my voice soft enough to force him to listen. It wasn't a challenge. It was a mother's question. He swallowed. His jaw tightened. He jerked his head at his wife. She doesn't feel comfortable anymore. You're always questioning everything. You make her feel unwelcome. His wife's eyebrows shot up dramatically, like she'd been waiting to play this part. I just feel judged, she said. Every move I make, you have something to say. I almost laughed. Judged? The girl couldn't fold laundry without calling me to ask where the towels went. Instead of laughing, I folded my hands together on the table. My knuckles were soft, lined, a little swollen from years of arthritis. They trembled lightly, not from fear but from age, and I placed them flat to steady them. I didn't know asking why the children went to school with no jackets was judgment, I said, not unkindly. Her face twisted, offended. My son exhaled loudly through his nose. The heater clicked off, leaving an odd stillness behind it. The quiet made the tension louder. My son stepped closer, hands clenched. We talked about it. This is what's best. Best for whom? The words hovered at the back of my tongue, but I kept them inside. The calm growing inside me wasn't weakness. It was clarity. They were pushing me hard, expecting me to fall. But they didn't know I had something they didn't. A truth quietly tucked away in my bedroom drawer upstairs. A truth neither of them had bothered to understand. I didn't mention it. Not yet. I simply breathed in, breathed out. You made this decision together? I asked. His wife nodded too quickly as if answering on his behalf. Another clue. My husband's footsteps sounded in the hallway, heavy, slow, the way they'd become the past year. When he reached the dining room, he froze in the doorway, taking in the raised voices, the scattered plates, my son standing over me like a man delivering bad news. What's going on? He asked, his voice low. Before I could answer, my son spoke first. "She's leaving," he declared. "Not we asked her to leave. Not we think it's time. She's leaving." A command. A decision. Final. My husband looked at me, eyes full of questions he didn't have the courage to ask out loud. He always did that, stayed silent just long enough for the damage to be done. I forced a small smile. Apparently I'm no longer needed. My daughter-in-law flinched just barely. A flicker of guilt? Or just fear that I wasn't reacting the way she hoped? The dining room light above us flickered again, casting strange shadows across the table. For a moment the corner where the envelope sat looked darker, heavier. My son shifted, blocking it with his hand as if the envelope itself could betray him before he was ready. I filed the movement away in my mind. Everything meant something. Everything had a reason. The mashed potatoes had begun to form a thin skin from cooling. The candles I lit earlier had burned halfway down, wax dripping onto the wooden holders my husband carved years ago. The faint smell of rosemary and garlic hovered in the air, warm, comforting, a painful contrast to the coldness sitting beside me. My son moved closer, the anger returning to his face now that he felt backed up by silence and youth. "Mom," he said harshly, "don't make this harder. Just go upstairs, pack a few things and walk out of my home quietly." I finished for him. He hesitated. Just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected me to speak with strength. I stood slowly, my chair scraping softly against the hardwood floor. My knees weren't what they used to be, but I rose tall anyway. Taller than I'd felt in months. "I'm not causing a scene," I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably. "People fear quiet more than shouting. Quiet makes them wonder what you're thinking. Quiet makes them nervous." I picked up my coffee mug, walked it to the sink and rinsed it under warm water. The mundane act made them fidget. They wanted tears. They wanted collapse. They wanted guilt to do their work for them. Instead, I placed the mug gently on the rack to dry. My son stepped forward again. "Mom, I'm serious." "So am I," I replied. And I was. I walked back toward the table, toward him, not close enough to challenge him physically, just close enough that he had to look into my eyes. "Really look. Are you sure?" I asked softly. "This is the decision you want to make?" His throat bobbed. A flicker of uncertainty so brief most mothers might have missed it. But I caught it. He didn't answer. Not because he didn't have one, but because he didn't want to say it out loud. My husband finally stepped inside the room, his face pale. "Can we talk about this?" he whispered to our son. His wife immediately stiffened. She didn't want discussions. She wanted me out. She wanted control of something she didn't understand. "We've already talked," she said sharply. Too sharply. Her mask was slipping. I turned toward her slowly, watching her eyes dart nervously to my purse, lying by my chair, as if she feared I might reach inside and pull out something dangerous. She wasn't wrong. There was something dangerous in there. But not in the way she imagined. Their world had been balanced on my quiet contributions for years. Financial, emotional, practical. They thought pushing me out was the end. They didn't realize it was the beginning. The heater kicked back on with a low hum, warming the air as I stepped around the table, stopping at the head of it, the spot my husband usually sat. My son straightened almost out of instinct. The roles had shifted. He felt it before he understood it. I looked at him, my grown man, my child, the same boy I once carried on my hip, and said the last line of the night, the one that froze every movement in the room. "If I walk out that door tonight, everything changes." His face tightened. My daughter-in-law blinked rapidly. My husband exhaled shakily. I didn't explain what I meant. Not yet. Not here. I turned toward the staircase, calm, steady, unbroken, and took the first step up. Behind me no one spoke. The silence was thick enough to taste. And that's exactly how I wanted it. I placed my foot on the next step, letting the silence behind me settle like dust after an explosion. I didn't look over my shoulder. I didn't need to. Their shock followed me up the staircase like a shadow, heavy and trembling, unsure whether to chase me or let me go. My hand slid along the wooden railing, smooth in some places, worn in others. I remembered varnishing it myself years ago, brushing along the grain while my son played with toy trucks at the bottom of the stairs. That memory should have hurt. Surprisingly, it didn't. There was something strangely freeing about knowing the house was no longer mine to protect. I reached the hallway and felt the temperature shift. Slightly colder, quieter, almost eerie. The family photos lining the wall seemed to watch me as I walked past them. My younger self holding my newborn son. My husband on our 10th anniversary. The three of us at his college graduation. All those moments frozen, unaware that tonight, everything between us would change. I opened my bedroom door slowly as if the room itself needed time to prepare. The faint smell of lavender from my drawer sachets drifted out. The bedspread was still smooth from that morning, the small lamp still glowing beside it. For a second I just stood there, not because I was overwhelmed but because I wanted to feel the air shift around me, like the room was exhaling with relief. I walked toward my dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside, my neatly folded sweaters stared back at me. I didn't touch them. Clothes could be replaced. Memories could not. And tonight, I wasn't leaving this house as a woman banished. I was leaving as a woman who had finally stopped pretending to be blind. I moved the sweaters aside carefully, revealing the small lockbox tucked at the back. My fingers brushed its cold metal surface, and a strange strength spread through my arms, steady and unshakable. This wasn't the moment of victory, not yet, but it was the moment of awakening. I clicked the box open. Inside were documents no one else in this house had bothered to understand. Property tax receipts with my name as payer, loan agreements with my signature as guarantor, savings certificates I had kept separate for my own emergencies. A small stack of bank letters confirming my ownership of the joint accounts they assumed were theirs too. I lifted each document one by one, placing them into my handbag with a soft rustle. The papers felt heavier tonight, not in weight but in meaning. These were the parts of my life I never flaunted. The responsibilities I took on quietly. The safety nets they had used without ever acknowledging. A soft creak echoed from the hallway. Someone had stepped onto the floorboards. I held my breath. "Mom," my husband's voice whispered from behind the door frame. He didn't step inside. He just stood there, shadow long across the carpet, hands hanging uselessly at his sides. I turned my head slightly, enough to see his silhouette. "You shouldn't leave like this," he murmured. "Let's talk, please." I zipped the handbag and placed it on the bed. "You didn't say a word downstairs," I said quietly. "Talking now won't change much." He shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't want to make it worse." "It was already worse," I replied. "And you let it happen." The honesty surprised him. My husband wasn't a cruel man, just a silent one. Silent during hard moments. Silent when loyalty needed to be spoken aloud. Silent when I needed him most. He stepped closer, finally entering the room. His eyes were tired, older than I remembered. "If you leave tonight," he whispered, "it will break this family." I met his gaze steadily. It broke long before I stood up from that table. He opened his mouth to argue, but I didn't give him the chance. I lifted my purse and felt the weight settle comfortably against my arm, grounding me. I took one last look around the room, not because I was sentimental but because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt in this moment. Calm, clear, necessary. I walked past him without another word. The hallway was empty now. My footsteps were soft against the runner rug, but each one echoed louder in my chest. I descended the staircase slowly, feeling the shift in air as I left the upper floor, warmer downstairs, thick with tension. My son and his wife were still in the dining room. The candle flames flickered wildly, shaking shadows across the walls. My daughter-in-law sat gripping her water glass, her knuckles pale. My son stood rigid near the table, chest tight with leftover anger. When they saw me, their expressions froze. I reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, not out of hesitation but out of a strange sense of ceremony. This wasn't just me leaving a house. This was me stepping out of a role I had held too long. Caretaker, peacekeeper, silent protector. My son spoke first, voice cracking. "Where are you going?" I adjusted the strap of my purse. "Somewhere quiet." My daughter-in-law blinked rapidly, fear flickering across her face. She hadn't expected this calm. This control. She had expected a meltdown. Tears. Maybe begging. But I wasn't the woman they imagined. "Mom," my son started, stepping toward me. "Don't," I said gently. "You made your choice." The softness in my voice made him stop more effectively than shouting ever could. I reached for my coat hanging by the front door. The wool brushed against my arms as I slid it on, the faint scent of the lavender dryer sheet still clinging to the fabric. I buttoned it slowly, each click steady and deliberate. As I wrapped my scarf around my neck, a gust of cold air slipped through the thin window by the door, carrying the smell of distant wood smoke and winter frost. The night outside was pitch black, the porch light casting a narrow beam across the walkway. I placed my hand on the doorknob. My daughter-in-law shifted uncomfortably. "You don't have to leave like this," she muttered, voice trembling slightly. I turned to her. "No," I said calmly. "You're right. I don't have to. I'm choosing to." Her mouth closed instantly. My son looked between us, panic beginning to rise behind his eyes. He wasn't used to uncertainty. He wasn't used to consequences wearing the shape of his mother. "Mom, please," he tried again. "I asked you once if you were sure," I said, keeping my voice steady. "You didn't answer." He swallowed hard. "I thought you were bluffing." I smiled sadly. "You should know by now I don't bluff." I opened the door. Cold air rushed inside, filling the hallway with the sharp sting of winter. The porch light buzzed faintly above me, illuminating my breath as I stepped out onto the top stair. Behind me no one spoke. The night was quiet. A distant dog barked 2 streets away. A car engine turned over somewhere far down the block. Frost glimmered on the grass, catching the light like tiny shards of glass. My husband finally appeared behind my son, his eyes full of helpless questions he still didn't know how to voice. But I didn't turn back. I didn't reach for him. I didn't explain myself. Some choices don't need explanations. Some moments write themselves without dialogue. I took the first step onto the sidewalk. The cold seeped through my shoes. The wind nipped at my cheeks. The streetlight cast a lonely glow on the quiet road, the same one I had walked 1,000 times before, but never with this kind of purpose. Halfway down the street, I heard the door close behind me. The sound echoed in the still air, final, heavy, almost ceremonial. I didn't slow down. I didn't wipe my eyes. I didn't second-guess myself. Instead, I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out my phone, and typed 3 simple words to my lawyer. "It's time now." The message sent instantly. A cold wind brushed against my face, but there was a warmth rising somewhere inside me, not from anger and not from sadness. From truth. From clarity. From the certainty that tonight, for the first time in years, I was walking toward something instead of running from it. And I didn't look back once. But as the cold air wrapped around me, sharper with every step, something inside me steadied even more. The quiet street felt like a long, open hallway leading me toward a truth I had avoided for too long. I tightened my scarf and kept walking until the house was no longer in my peripheral vision. My breath formed pale clouds in front of me, disappearing quickly into the winter darkness. I felt strangely weightless, not because I wasn't hurting but because the weight was no longer mine to carry inside their home. When I reached the corner of the block, a street lamp buzzed, flickering above me. The yellow light shimmered off the frost coating the bushes and sidewalks. I stood beneath it for a moment, letting the cool glow settle over me like a strange blessing. The phone vibrated softly in my pocket. It was my lawyer. "Still want to proceed tonight?" A simple question. A heavy one. I typed back, "Yes. Tonight." Not a drop of hesitation in my fingers. I crossed the road toward the small community park, empty at this hour except for a rusted swing set and a bench covered with a thin dusting of frost. I brushed the frost away and sat down. My knees stiffened instantly at the cold metal, but I didn't mind. The sharpness brought clarity. From this vantage point, I could still see the faint outline of my son's house up the street, warm lights glowing behind the curtains, a life still cushioned by the comfort I had built. They had no idea how fragile that comfort really was. No idea how much of it was held together by paperwork and signatures they never bothered to understand. My lawyer called. "I'm drafting the freeze order on the joint account," he said. "It will suspend all withdrawals until you give permission." His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, almost too gentle for what we were about to do. "Do it," I replied, pulling my coat tighter around me as a gust of wind stung my cheeks. "You sure you don't want to wait until morning?" he asked. "It'll be cleaner, less abrupt." I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. "No. I want the freeze in effect before midnight." There was a small pause. "Then it'll be done." When he hung up, I slowly lowered the phone into my lap and stared at my hands under the lamplight. The lines etched into my skin looked deeper tonight. Realer. like they'd been carved by years of holding a family together without acknowledgement. A car drove past slowly, tires crunching over thin ice. The driver glanced at me briefly, an older woman sitting alone on a park bench at night, but didn't stop. The headlights washed over me briefly and then disappeared down the street. I waited. After a few minutes, another vibration came. Joint account frozen. Notifications sent. I imagined the gentle ping echoing inside my son's phone, the sudden confusion on his face. Maybe he would think it was a bank glitch. Maybe he would think nothing at all. The real impact would come later. A sudden ache throbbed in my chest, not regret but something like mourning. Mourning the years I spent cushioning their mistakes. Mourning the softness they mistook for weakness. Mourning the trust that cracked tonight. The wind picked up, rustling the brown leaves trapped under the swing set. I stood, pulling my purse close, and started walking toward my daughter's neighborhood. It wasn't far, 15 minutes by foot, but the streets felt longer in the cold. The pavement shimmered faintly under the streetlights, and somewhere a dog barked behind a fence, startled by some invisible movement. I kept walking, my breath steady, my pace slow but determined. 2 blocks from my daughter's apartment, I passed a row of closed shops. A bakery, a dry cleaner, a florist. Their dark windows reflected my silhouette back at me. An older woman bundled in a long coat, hair messy from the wind, eyes sharper than they had been in years. For a moment I paused in front of the florist. The faint smell of old petals and moisture seeped through the cracks near the door. Behind the glass, the faint outline of a bouquet caught my eye, sunflowers wilted around the edges. But I didn't see the flowers. I saw the day I helped my son and his wife pick their wedding decoration theme. Sunflowers for warmth, they'd said. I had paid for half of it without mentioning the strain it put on my savings. Never again, I whispered to the reflection. The words surprised me. They came out firm. Final. When I reached my daughter's apartment, the hallway smelled faintly of laundry detergent and old carpet. A soft hum of someone's television slipped under a door nearby. I climbed the stairs slowly, steadying myself on the railing. My fingers ached from the cold and my knuckles were stiff when I knocked. My daughter opened the door halfway, already in her pajamas, her hair tied up messily. "Mom," she whispered, startled. "What are you doing here this late?" I stepped inside, letting the warmth of her apartment wrap around me. The faint smell of chamomile tea drifted from the kitchen. "I needed a place to stay tonight," I said calmly. Her eyebrows knit together. "What happened?" "Not now," I said gently. "I'm too tired to explain." She didn't push. He never pushed. Instead, she led me to the small guest room she had prepared for emergencies. I sat on the bed and she handed me a warm mug of tea. The heat seeped into my hands, loosening the tension in my fingers. "Do you need anything else?" she asked softly. I shook my head. "Thank you, sweetheart. Get some rest." She hesitated before squeezing my shoulder lightly. "I'm here if you need me." When she left the room, I let out a slow breath. The walls were painted a pale cream color. A framed picture of a lighthouse hung above the bed. The comforter was soft and smelled of lavender fabric softener. My phone vibrated again, this time with a string of alerts from the bank. Internal notes. Security confirmations. Freeze verifications. Everything processed. Then a final message from my lawyer. "Tomorrow morning we can talk about the other accounts." Other accounts. Plural. The ones they never remembered, never asked about, never wanted to understand. I placed the phone down on the dresser and sat back against the pillow. My shoulders ached, a deep pulsing ache that came from more than just the walk in the cold. It came from years of carrying burdens silently. The bedside lamp cast a soft glow across the room, and I watched the shadows shift with the movement of the curtain in the slight airflow. I let my breathing slow, my muscles loosen, but my mind didn't rest. Because somewhere across town in that warm house, they were still unaware of what was unraveling. And I wasn't finished. The next morning, before dawn, I woke to the sound of a text notification. The room was still dim, the first hint of morning barely touching the sky outside the window. I reached for my phone. It wasn't my lawyer. It was my son. "Mom, something's wrong with the account. Call me right now." I wanted to pity him. I really did. But pity had been drained from me long before tonight. Instead, I set the phone face down on the blanket and stood, stretching my stiff back. The floor was cool under my feet, the kind of coolness that forced you fully awake. I walked toward the window and opened the blinds slightly. The sky was streaked with pale gray, the kind that promised a colder day ahead. Frost clung to the rooftops and glimmered faintly in the early light. Somewhere in the building, a kettle whistled. Down on the street, someone scraped ice off a windshield. Life was moving, and so was I. I poured myself a glass of water from the kitchen, careful not to make noise. My daughter was still asleep. The apartment felt peaceful in a way my son's house never did. When I sat back on the bed, my phone buzzed again. Another message. Mom, answer me. Something's wrong. Wrong? Oh. Things were finally becoming right. I typed a short response. Talk to your bank. No explanation. No comfort. No emotional cushioning. He needed to learn what it felt like to stand on his own feet, without my silent support under every step. When I set the phone down, a realization washed over me like warm water. Tonight had not been the end of something. It had been the beginning. The beginning of them understanding that the life they built, the comfort they lived in, had always been supported by the quiet, unseen labor of the woman they pushed aside. And now, piece by piece, I was pulling back every strand of that support. Not out of spite, but out of survival. They had asked me to leave. They had no idea what that truly meant. But the next 48 hours would begin to teach them. Slowly at first, then all at once. It started before sunrise with a single call that rattled the quiet inside my daughter's apartment. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, sipping warm tea from her favorite blue mug, when my phone buzzed with a number I recognized. The electric company. The representative's voice was polite but firm. Ma'am, we're confirming the discontinuation order you placed yesterday evening. Service will officially disconnect today. I blinked. That was fast. Yes, she said. Since the account is solely in your name, the cancellation went through immediately. Solely in my name. A detail my son never cared about. A detail his wife always assumed favored them. Thank you, I said quietly before hanging up. I didn't smile. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Like someone finally seeing the truth of her own power after decades of giving it away. Not an hour later, my phone buzzed again, but this time with a frantic call from my husband. Mary, he stammered. Something's wrong. The lights went out. The whole place is dark. I closed my eyes not out of regret, but because I needed a moment to absorb how quickly the first domino had fallen. Did you check the breaker? I asked softly. Yes, he said. It's not that. The neighbors have power. I could already hear the panic rising behind his breath. Not anger, just fear. Fear of a world he never had to manage because I always handled it quietly without announcements or credit. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said gently. The bills weren't my responsibility anymore, remember? He paused, breathing heavily. Mary, please, just tell me what to do. The plea in his voice cracked a small part of me. My husband was many things. Forgetful, silent, conflict avoidant, but cruel was never one of them. He simply let life happen around him, trusting me to keep it all smooth. But this wasn't just about him anymore. Talk to the utility company, I replied softly. They'll tell you. I didn't say another word. Neither did he. When I ended the call, the kitchen fell quiet again. My daughter patted in a moment later, still in pajamas, hair messy from sleep. You're up early, she murmured, pouring herself coffee. I couldn't sleep, I admitted. She sat across from me, studying my face. Is today going to bring trouble? I hesitated before answering. Maybe not trouble, I said. But truth. She didn't press further, she knew better. By 8 o'clock another call came, this time from my daughter-in-law. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask where I was. She went straight into panic. Why isn't the house account working? The bank said something about authorization suspended. And now the school emailed saying the payment failed for the kids. Did you do something? I didn't answer immediately. I let her words hang in the air, sharp and frantic, like loose wires waiting to spark. Payments under my name were deactivated, I said calmly. That's all. That's all, she snapped. You're ruining everything. Ruining everything? I almost laughed. Years of unpaid labor, quiet sacrifices, and sleepless nights. And the moment I stopped carrying them, I was the one ruining things. But I stayed calm. Because calmness unsettles people who rely on someone else's chaos to hide their own. You told me I wasn't needed, I said. I listened. She let out a frustrated breath. This isn't funny, Mary. The boys need their school paid. The mortgage is due next week. We can't. You'll figure it out, I said, mirroring the very words they once threw at me whenever I struggled after medical bills or grocery costs. You're capable adults. There was a long, icy silence. Then, you're doing this on purpose. No, I said. I'm doing this because you asked me to leave your home and your life. I'm simply respecting that. She ended the call without another word. For a moment I just sat there, listening to the faint buzz of the refrigerator and the soft hum of my daughter's heating vent. The world outside was still waking up. A car honked down the street. Someone walked a dog past the window, bundled tightly against the cold. Almost an hour passed before the next call came. My son this time. Mom, please, he said, voice strained. We need to talk. The bank froze the joint account. They said it was authorized by you. That's correct, I said. But why? Why would you do that? You never cared about the money before. I leaned back in the chair, letting the morning light from the window warm my face. I cared, I said. I just didn't remind you every time I helped. He sighed shakily. Can't you just reverse it? Just for a few days. I won't, I replied quietly. His breath caught. Mom. I'm not punishing you, I said. I'm just stepping out of responsibilities that were never appreciated. He didn't answer at first. I could hear movement behind him. Footsteps, the soft cry of one of the children, the faint metallic click of a kettle being set on the stove. Then he said something he had never said to me before. I didn't know you felt this way. The admission floated between us like a fragile, unexpected shard of truth. I swallowed. You never asked how I felt. He inhaled sharply, and for a split second I wondered if he might apologize right there. But pride is a stubborn thing. We'll talk later, he muttered, then hung up. But the unraveling wasn't done. By noon, my husband arrived at my daughter's apartment building. He knocked softly, as if his hand didn't have the strength for anything more. My daughter opened the door before I could stand up. He stepped inside cautiously, like he wasn't sure if he was welcome. Mary, he whispered when he saw me. Can we talk? I nodded and walked with him to the small balcony. The cold air rushed around us when I slid the door open. A flock of birds scattered from the nearby tree, wings flapping wildly. He wrapped his coat tighter around himself. We had to throw away all the groceries this morning, he said quietly. The fridge shut off with the power. I raised an eyebrow. You can buy more. He flinched, surprised by the simplicity of my answer. For years he watched me manage everything. The shopping, the bills, the repairs, the scheduling, without ever realizing how much work went into each small task. Your daughter-in-law is blaming me, he admitted. She keeps saying I let this happen. I studied his face. The wrinkles around his eyes deeper than I remembered, his shoulders slumped under the weight of this new reality. And did you? I asked gently. He opened his mouth to respond, but no sound came. Because deep inside he knew the truth. He had stood by silently last night. And silence is its own kind of choice. I don't want the house to fall apart, he whispered. I don't know how to keep it together. You don't have to keep it together, I said softly. You just have to face what's been happening. He looked out at the street below, where two kids dragged a sled across the cracked pavement. They didn't think you'd really leave. I know. And they didn't think you'd really pull your support. I know. The wind blew a thin sheet of frost across the balcony floor, glittering like scattered salt. Mary, he said, his voice trembling. Will you come home? It wasn't a demand. It wasn't even a plea. It was fear. The fear of a man realizing he had never understood the value of the woman quietly running his world. I shook my head slowly. Not yet. He closed his eyes, breathing through the hurt. They miss you. I met his gaze. Do they miss me? Or do they miss what I provided? He didn't answer. Because we both knew the truth. Later that afternoon my phone buzzed with another message, this time from the bank. A formal notice. Possible misuse of authorized funds detected. Investigation initiated. My hands tightened around the phone. A tremor of something, not anger, not joy, something heavier, pressed into my chest. This was the next stage. The stage no one in that house was prepared for. When I looked up, the sky was turning soft orange, streaked with gray clouds. My daughter's living room was filled with the warm glow of the setting sun. She stood by the kitchen counter watching me with quiet concern. "Is everything getting worse?" she asked. I exhaled slowly. "It's getting honest." She nodded, understanding more than she said. And in that moment, with the sun dipping low, the world shifting beneath all of us, I realized something important. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. And their home, once cushioned by my silence, was beginning to crumble from the inside. And by the third morning, the cracks were no longer cracks. They were wide enough for truth to walk right through. I was brewing tea in my daughter's kitchen when the pounding started on her front door. Not knocking, pounding. Desperate, uneven, almost frantic. My daughter peeked through the peephole, her eyebrows shooting up. "It's him," she whispered. "My son." For a moment I didn't move. I watched the steam curl from the mug in my hands, watched the faint reflection of myself in the window above the sink. Hair slightly messy, sweater sleeves pushed up, a calmness on my face that felt both new and ancient. "Let him in," I said softly. When my daughter opened the door, my son rushed inside, breath visible from the cold outside. His coat was unbuttoned, hair uncombed, eyes red-rimmed like he hadn't slept. "Mom," he said, not angrily, not demanding, but broken in a way I had never seen. "I need to talk to you." I set my mug down and gave him a small nod toward the living room. He followed silently, his footsteps shaky on the hardwood floor. The morning light spilled across the couch, creating a strange warmth in the room despite the cold outside. He sat down heavily, hands clasped, fingers trembling. "Everything is falling apart," he said, voice cracking. "The accounts, the bills. The bank called. They're investigating transactions I thought were routine. They said there were inconsistencies." I folded my hands in my lap. "Yes." His eyes snapped up. "You knew." "I did," I said. "For months." He stared at me as if seeing a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me?" I tilted my head slightly. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. He hadn't listened to anything I said for years. My warnings became nagging. My advice became criticism. My concerns became interference. And now he was drowning in the silence he once demanded from me. He took a shuddering breath. "The bank said I might have to repay things. They said some withdrawals weren't authorized. That they were filed under your name. That they need to verify intent." I nodded slowly. "That's correct." "Mom," he whispered, "am I going to lose everything?" The question hung there between us, trembling, fragile. I leaned back, letting the warmth of the room settle around me. "You won't lose what you earned," I said. "Only what you took for granted." He flinched as if I'd struck him. And in a way the truth did more damage than any blow could. "What do you want from me?" he asked. "An apology? Money? What?" I shook my head. "I never wanted anything from you. I wanted respect. That's all." He dropped his gaze, staring at the floor like it held answers. I stood and walked toward the small side table where my handbag rested. I opened it slowly, the soft rustle of papers filling the quiet. My son watched with nervous anticipation. I pulled out the stack of documents, the ones I had collected the night I walked out. Property tax receipts. Loan co-signatures. Savings certificates. Account ownership papers. Everything. I placed them on the coffee table between us. He blinked. What is all that?" "These," I said gently, "are the pieces of your life you thought belonged to you. But they never did. Every bill I paid, every account I opened, every loan I secured, it was all under my name. You benefited from it. You relied on it. But you never once asked how any of it worked." He stared at the papers as if they were foreign objects. I continued, my voice steady. "When you told me to get out, you assumed I would leave quietly and your life would remain untouched. But that life was stitched together by my hands. So when I stepped away, the seams naturally came undone." He pressed his palms to his eyes. "Mom, I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the problem." A tear rolled down his cheek, the first I had seen from him in years. Not the angry tears of a man whose pride was hurt, but the quiet tears of a boy realizing the foundation he stood on wasn't the one he built. "Is it too late?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "For what?" "For me to fix this." I sat down beside him, not touching him but close enough to soften the space between us. That depends, I said. Do you want to fix the finances? Or do you want to fix us? He swallowed hard. Both. A long silence stretched between us. Not hostile. Not cold. Just deep, like the quiet after a storm when trees are still swaying but the wind has finally calmed. Then a softer knock came at the door. My daughter opened it and my husband walked in. He looked older than he had a week ago. Exhausted. Defeated. But his eyes found mine immediately. Mary, he whispered. He didn't ask permission to enter. He just did, slowly, carefully, like a man stepping onto thin ice. He sat across from me, glancing at our son, then at the stack of documents. I saw everything, he said quietly. Every paper. Every signature. I went through the files in your drawer after you left. I didn't know. He shook his head. It was you. It was always you. My chest tightened, not with pain but with the weight of years finally settling into words. My husband leaned forward, elbows on his knees. How did we not see it? How did we let ourselves rely on you so much and never truly appreciate you? I met his gaze. Because I never asked you to. My son wiped his face, embarrassed. We should have known. Maybe, I said. But knowing isn't something you do automatically. Takes effort. And you both stopped making that effort long ago. My husband's voice cracked. I want to make it now, Mary. My son nodded quickly. Me too. I breathed in deeply, letting their words settle. Part apology. Part awakening. Part desperation. I'm not coming back to the house, I said softly. My son's shoulders slumped. My husband closed his eyes as if bracing for impact. But, I continued, I'm willing to help you rebuild, the right way. Not by doing everything for you. Not by carrying the whole weight. But by teaching you what you should have learned long ago. My son looked up hopeful. You help us. I'll guide you, I said. Not save you. My husband nodded slowly. We deserve that. And more, I replied. But this is where we start. The weight in the room shifted. The tension easing, the truth settling like dust finally finding the floor. My daughter stepped into the living room then, a soft smile on her face. She had heard enough to understand everything. Do you want something to drink? She asked gently. My husband nodded. My son whispered a small, thank you, his voice trembling. While she walked to the kitchen, I looked at the two men in front of me, both flawed, both guilty, but both finally aware. Mom, my son said quietly, I'm sorry. For everything. For the way I spoke to you. For pushing you away. For not seeing you. I reached out and touched his hand, just a light touch, nothing more. I know, I said. And that's why I'm here. My husband leaned forward, voice soft. Can we earn you back? I smiled. A small, sad, honest smile. You can start, I said. Today. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft flakes drifting past the window like tiny pieces of forgiveness settling on the world. My son took a shaking breath. What happens now? Now, I said. You rebuild the life you thought you built alone. And I finally get to rest from the weight I carried in silence. My husband nodded. My son wiped his face again. My daughter returned with warm coffee. We sat together, not fixed, not perfect, but honest. And that was enough. As the snow thickened outside, covering the street in a thin white blanket, I realized something quietly profound. They hadn't learned who I was tonight. They had learned who I had always been. And in the soft glow of my daughter's living room, surrounded by remorse and understanding, I finally spoke the words that closed the story the way it needed to end. You asked me to leave your house. But now you'll learn to live with the truth, that I was the one who held it together. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. Thank you for listening to my story. If this touched you, please subscribe. Your support means more than you know. Join me again tomorrow for another powerful tale of strength, healing, and quiet justice.